1657, the Deccan Plateau, a land of red laterite earth, monsoon storms violent enough to swallow armies, and kingdoms built on the edge of swords. For decades, the Mughal Empire had stretched its shadow across nearly every corner of the Indian subcontinent. Emperors who commanded millions, armies that could darken a horizon, a dynasty that genuinely believed, that God himself had ordained their rule over all of India. But in the rugged hills of the Western Ghats, something was growing that the Mughals hadn't accounted for. A rebellion, a movement, a man. Sambhaji Bhosle was not supposed to exist. A low-ranking Maratha chieftain's son who had the audacity to carve out an independent kingdom. Not by playing politics, not by bowing to right emperor, but by outthinking, outmaneuvering, and outfighting every single power that came at him. And in May 1657, while that man was in the middle of the fight of his life, a child was born. His name was Sambhaji, and this is where his story begins. To understand Sambhaji, you cannot just look at the man he became. You have to understand the world that built him, because it was not a gentle world. The Deccan in the mid-17th century was essentially a chessboard where every piece was trying to kill every other piece. To the north, the Mughal Empire under Aurangzeb, one of the most powerful and ruthless emperors in Indian history. To the south and west, the Adil Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur and Nizam Shahi of Ahmednagar, both hostile to any Maratha power rising in the region. And along the coast, the Portuguese, colonial, aggressive, and deeply threatened by anyone who controlled the Konkan shoreline. Sambhaji was at war with all of them, simultaneously, on purpose. By the time Sambhaji was born, his father had already pulled off military feats that seemed closer to legend than history. The assassination of Afzal Khan, a Bijapur general twice Sambhaji's size. In 1659, a meeting that was supposed to end in Sambhaji's death, but ended in Afzal Khan's instead. The sacking of Surat in 1664, where Sambhaji raided the wealthiest Mughal port city and walked away with enough wealth to fund his kingdom for years. This was the environment Sambhaji entered, not a palace of calm and ceremony, a fortress under permanent siege, metaphorically and sometimes literally. The Maratha kingdom wasn't a nation yet. It was a vision held together by one man's will, and that man was Sambhaji's father. Sambhaji's mother was Sambhaji Bhosle. History has not preserved as much about her as it should have, which is a tragedy in itself, because by every account that survives, she was exceptional, intelligent, composed, deeply respected within the Maratha court. Sambhaji's first, and by most historical assessments, most beloved wife. She died in September 1659. Sambhaji was 2 years old. 2 years old. There's something uniquely devastating about losing a parent at that age. Old enough that the absence will register, that something warm and essential is suddenly gone, but too young to hold on to any real memory of who she was. Sambhaji would grow up knowing his mother only through the grief of others, through the way his father's eyes changed when her name was spoken, through the silence that filled rooms where she used to be. Sambhaji was, by historical accounts, deeply shattered by Sambhaji's death. He had other wives, as was customary for kings of the era, but none replaced her in his affections. And while he was a king who could not afford to stop, could not afford to grieve publicly for long, that loss left a mark that never fully healed. For Sambhaji, the immediate consequence was practical and cold. He needed to be raised by someone. In the early years, much of his care fell to his paternal grandmother, Jijabai, Sambhaji's mother, a formidable woman in her own right, deeply religious, fiercely nationalistic, someone who had poured into Sambhaji the same fire that made him who he was. Jijabai loved Sambhaji, but she was also aging, and the court around young Sambhaji was never simply a family. It was a political arena. Every advisor, every general, every noble in that fort had an agenda, and the young prince was already, without knowing it, a piece in games he couldn't yet see. Here is something that rarely gets discussed about Sambhaji's childhood. Being Sambhaji's son was not a gift. It was a weight. Sambhaji was becoming a legend in real time. Every year brought a new story, a new victory, a new impossibility made real. His men worshipped him. His enemies feared him. The common people of the Deccan began to see him as something close to divine, a king sent by the gods to restore Hindu sovereignty in a land that had been under foreign Muslim rule for centuries. So, what does that do to a child? To grow up as the son of a myth. Sambhaji's education was rigorous and wide. He was trained in warfare, in statecraft, in horsemanship. But what stands out in the historical record is his intellectual sharpness. He was fluent in multiple languages: Marathi, Sanskrit, Hindi, Persian. He composed poetry. He wrote a Sanskrit political treatise called Budbhushanam, a sophisticated work on kingship and governance, while still a young man. This was not someone coasting on his father's name. But brilliance has a shadow side when it grows up without enough warmth. Sambhaji was described by contemporaries as intense, impatient, and prone to making decisions with his emotions rather than cold calculation. He had opinions, strong ones, and he expressed them at court in ways that didn't always sit well with Shivaji's senior advisors. The court saw a boy who needed to be controlled. Sambhaji saw a court that underestimated him. That tension would only grow. In 1666, something happened that would fundamentally alter how Sambhaji understood the world. Emperor Aurangzeb, by then firmly consolidated as the most powerful ruler in India, summoned Shivaji to his court in Agra. The stated reason was reconciliation, diplomacy, and offered to bring the Marathas into the Mughal fold with dignity and respect. Shivaji was skeptical. His advisors were skeptical. But the political calculus seemed to favor going. Refusing an imperial summons was itself an act of war, and Shivaji was not ready for that particular war at that particular moment. He went, and he took 9-year-old Sambhaji with him. What followed was a masterclass in Mughal psychological warfare. At the court ceremony, Shivaji was placed in a rank of nobles far beneath his status, a deliberate insult, designed to make clear that in Aurangzeb's world, Shivaji was not a king. He was a subordinate chieftain who had gotten too comfortable. Shivaji's reaction was explosive. He protested publicly, loudly, in the middle of the imperial court. And Aurangzeb's response was equally decisive. Both Shivaji and Sambhaji were placed under house arrest in Agra, guests who could not leave. Imagine being 9 years old and watching that. Your father, the most powerful, most invincible man you have ever known, humiliated in front of hundreds of courtiers, stripped of dignity by an emperor who smiled while he did it, and then imprisoned. The weeks that followed must have felt suffocating, surrounded by Mughal soldiers, in a city that wasn't home, watching your father plan and calculate and wait. And then Shivaji escaped. The details vary by source, but the essence is the same. Through a combination of audacity, careful planning, and perhaps a little bribery, Shivaji slipped out of Mughal custody. Sambhaji was smuggled out separately, through a different route, disguised and hidden for safety. They both made it back to the Deccan. But that 9-year-old boy had learned something that no classroom could have taught him. He had seen his father's greatness, and he had seen that even greatness could be trapped. That Aurangzeb's court was not civilization. It was a gilded cage with a smiling emperor holding the lock. Sambhaji would carry that lesson for the rest of his life. By the early 1670s, Sambhaji was a teenager navigating a court that had grown more complex, more dangerous, and more politically charged with every passing year. In 1674, Shivaji achieved what had once seemed impossible. He was formally crowned Chhatrapati, sovereign king of the Marathas, in a grand ceremony at Raigad Fort. It was a historic moment, the culmination of everything he had fought for. Sambhaji was there, watching, the heir apparent to a kingdom that now officially existed. But something was already cracking beneath the surface. Shivaji's court was full of powerful men who had their own visions for the Maratha kingdom's future, and their own ideas about what kind of king Sambhaji would make. Some saw his intelligence and fire as assets. Many saw his temperament as a liability, and some, particularly around Shivaji's younger wife Surabai, mother of Sambhaji's younger half-brother Rajram, saw the young prince not as an heir to protect, but as an obstacle to remove. Sambhaji was not naive. He could feel the undercurrents. He knew that within the walls of his own home, there were people working against him, and his response, rather than patience and political maneuvering, was exactly what his enemies hoped for: impulsive, reactive, playing into their hands. He was brilliant. He was brave. He was already showing flashes of the military instinct that would one day make him one of the most formidable warriors in Maratha history. But he was also young, and he was about to make a decision so shocking, so unexpected, that would shake the entire Maratha kingdom to its foundation. Sambhaji Maharaj was not yet a king. He was barely an adult. But the forces around him, the politics, the grief, the pressure, the enemies hiding behind friendly faces, were already pushing him toward a breaking point. In the next episode, that breaking point arrives. Sambhaji makes a move that his father calls treason, that history calls complicated, and that Sambhaji himself would later have to answer for. The rebel prince was just getting started.